Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue, joined alongside Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen as we get ready for the whiteout game. The countdown clock is almost concluded for us here in Happy Valley. A lot of conversation this week. Now we'll get to see 60 minutes of football on Saturday night, 7:30 kickoff inside Beaver Stadium, broadcast on NBC, and it's going to be a raucous atmosphere as James Franklin called for early in the week. Just to give you a lay of the land from our podcast standpoint, in case you missed any of our previous content, we had a pretty loaded episode drop on Wednesday. We broke down Oregon in detail with Ducks reporter Eric Skopel, who covers the team for 24/7 Sports. So a lot of information on Oregon that we're not going to rehash on this episode, but we learned a lot about the Game 4 opponent that during that conversation. And then we also had a huge recruiting conversation with Tyler Calvaruso, a ton of 5 stars, top 24/7 prospects from within the region, from beyond the region. We didn't get to every name because it would have been a 4-hour podcast episode, but we covered a lot of ground there. There's a lot more content regarding the recruiting situation over at Lions247.com. Brian Doan, our national analyst, dropped a big story Thursday, kind of a guide for Penn State fans because this is a significant event. More than 100 players with the Penn State scholarship offer will be in attendance on Saturday. So if you missed that Wednesday episode, it's worth revisiting. But we're going to move things forward here on a Thursday as we record. Daniel, Mark, and I will offer our score predictions later, our players to watch. We've got a bunch of different things to get into from a variety of perspectives for this top 6 matchup. But Mark, the whiteout means we got a special going on at Lions247.com. I know we've brought that to your attention before over the past month or so with the kickoff special. This one's a little bit different, and why don't you tell our listeners and viewers why?
Yeah, you get 50% off annual. That's a good deal, $5 a month. But you know, there's a sneaky thing in there that if you look real hard, there's a ridiculous value. If you come on monthly at full price, it's $12.99, but you get immediate access to Paramount Plus, and that's the top level of Paramount Plus. So if you're a Tulsa King fan, if you're a Star Trek fan, if you're a CBS Sports fan, next week's game for Penn State UCLA is going to be on CBS. Will also be carried on Paramount Plus. It's a great deal. I'm not going to say anything about Paramount Plus pricing, but you can go and look and see what those plans cost, and it ends up being a really good deal. So I don't want to overload this podcast with promotional stuff, but 50% off annual, really good deal, but you're not eligible for Paramount Plus until it's over. Or you come on full price monthly for Paramount Plus with Paramount Plus. Just so people know too, I want to make this clear. We have Paramount Plus for our full paying customers as a perk to them. They don't get the discount every single year. And people were asking us, well, what do we get out of this? You're letting people on for X amount off every, whenever. This is what our longtime subscribers are able to get, and we value them greatly, and we're very happy that CBS allows us to do that.
Before we talk Penn State, Oregon, a couple more notes from me on Paramount Plus. If you're a Survivor nerd like my wife and I are, they have all 45 or 46 seasons of Survivor ready for you to check out. And if you got a young kid at home like I do, you can revisit some of those Nickelodeon classics like Rugrats and some of those good ones with them, because I've been kind of reintroducing some of those 90s cartoons to my kid because a lot of the stuff today is kind of trash. So that's all on Paramount as well. And just wanted
It was heartbreaking. The woman who got voted off last night. I mean, she was almost in tears, Tyler. I was watching her. When was it? Wednesday, whenever it was. Whatever.
Spoiler alert. Some of us record the show.
Oh, sorry.
All right, let's dive into this matchup preview. And we're going to go right to you, Daniel, because you are relatively fresh out of a call with Penn State running backs coach Stan Drayton. He is 3 games into his career here. We've covered a lot of ground on what he's accomplished as a running back coach at this level. Won national championships with Ohio State and with Florida. Had a lot of success at Texas. The NFL running back scene, you're going to find several of his guys there. What did you hear from Stan Drayton, particularly about number 10? Because senior Nick Singleton got a lot of preseason All-American hype around him. We know he continues to climb the ladder in the record books for a lot of different categories at Penn State, but thus far, it hasn't quite clicked for him the way we thought it might. So what did you hear today?
Yeah, there was a lot of talk with Stan Drayton about Nick Singleton. I think we've discussed it a ton, what we've seen from him over these first couple of weeks. And basically what Stan Drayton said is that he feels that Nick Singleton is set for launch right now, that he was working through things the first 3 weeks of the season from the mental perspective. Drayton's been very honest since I think that was the spring, where he said that, they're putting things on these guys' plates that they weren't asked to do previously, and there's a little bit of an adjustment out there. So when he sees Nick Singleton, carrying the ball against FIU and maybe only getting 2 or 3 yards when, I think even guys like us could see that, maybe there's 7 or 8 yards out there. Drayton says he sees a guy who's processing, who's thinking through things right now. But he feels that after the bye week, sitting down with him, going over some film study, that Singleton has, kind of straightened all of that out, that he's ready to go. So we'll see. I mean, I think Singleton last night, after practice Wednesday, he kind of expressed that he feels like he's ready to go. He's ready to let it rip. As James Franklin has said, Stan Drayton's terminology was cut it loose. And I asked Drayton, I said, you're talking about cutting it loose. James Franklin is talking about let it rip. Seems really simple from our perspective, like just go do it. But as a coach, how do you coach your player through that? And he said that they've looked that Nick Singleton has the film in the past that shows that he can do these things. So it's a question of sitting down with him, showing him that, and getting him that confidence, going into this game. So we'll see. I think as a little tease, I've got some stuff to say about the ground game in terms of predictions and things like that. But I think that Singleton appears to be in a good place where we stand Thursday.
Singleton leads this team in carries. He has 41 of them. That's 7 more than Kaytron Allen. He has turned those carries into 179 yards and 5 touchdowns. His longest run on those 41 carries is 16 yards. His average per carry is 4.4 yards. I mentioned this earlier, I think coming out of the Villanova matchup, so probably last week, maybe during the bye week. But his yards after contact right now on the season, 2.4 according to Pro Football Focus. Back his freshman year when he was the Big Ten Freshman of the Year, 4.6 yards after contact. You go back to his sophomore year, which was largely a struggle with Mike Yursich as offensive coordinator. He was at 2.8 yards per carry that year. And so last year, it was a significantly higher number. So we'll see if Nick Singleton can crank it into another gear. We all have more to say about that subject. And Nick Singleton had some things to say about that subject. Mark, you were over with Nick Singleton. I know Daniel got over there as well after practice on Wednesday. Even I popped in for a question. What did you hear from Singleton himself? Because there's been a lot of noise around him from others.
Yeah, he acknowledges it. I mean, that he was maybe overthinking things. He's very measured. I mean, you guys have both talked to him, and a very thoughtful kid. And you almost can see where adjusting coaches, where he might overthink things. Like when he's answering questions, and I don't mean this in a negative way because every kid handles it differently. He really thinks through everything that is being asked, or he'll ask you to repeat something. And that to me is a sign of a very intelligent person. There's nothing negative about that whatsoever. But, I was joking with you guys a little bit that I put up a 1-minute clip, and to get it to a minute, I had to have, 20 seconds of James Franklin and then splice 3 things Nick said together. But if you look at it, I mean, what he said is, yeah, he didn't say he has to let it rip. He said he's going to rip it or something like that. So the message has been sent, and he understands what he needs to do. And I came out of that thinking, this is a kid who is open to coaching. And that might not be the easiest thing for somebody who's had the success that he's had. But you have a new coach come in. Remember when Stan Drayton came in? He said he's going to coach these guys hard because, they're NFL-type backs, and he wants to get them to that level. So I think it's actually a positive for Singleton. Let's see if it shows out on the field. I think that's going to be the important thing, but did not seem defensive or anything like that when we were asking him about it. Measured, yes. Defensive, not at all. Acknowledgement, kind of sending the same message as the coaches did, yes.
Yeah, well, Penn State rushed for 297 yards in the 2024 Big Ten championship game. It was a 45-37 loss in Indianapolis, and Nick Singleton was dynamic that evening. 10 carries, 105 yards. That included a 41-yard run. He had 4 catches for 43 yards and a touchdown. That included a 22-yard catch. But Kaytron Allen was the larger story that night. 14 carries, 124 yards. He was running like a man possessed at times, and I think that really opened the floodgates for him because he has kind of been that guy through last postseason and through non-conference play in 2025. You were also able to hear from Drayton on another new pupil, another established senior in Kaytron Allen. And Daniel, I'd love to hear what he said about Kaytron.
Yeah, I think he really focused on Katron Allen's ability to hear things and retain them and then apply them right away. It was a little bit of a contrast with Singleton, maybe a bit where he focused on Katron's ability to process things quickly, to understand what is being said, and then apply it right away. And it goes back to instincts, and I think that's really what stands out when you watch Katron Allen run, is that he's got those instincts where he can find those holes, he can be patient, he knows when to push it, he knows when to hold back a little bit, and it usually ends with like a 5.5 yard run, which on track with that career average. Drayton also brought up that you're seeing someone who has leveled up in pass protection. He said that that there are safeties. I think he said triggering from 10 yards behind the line of scrimmage, and Allen is waiting for them at the line of scrimmage. That he knows where to be right now. That he's becoming a really well-rounded running back, and that he's producing. And I think that's really what it comes down to. He's producing, as a pass blocker, as a runner. Maybe we haven't seen too much of Katron Allen in the passing game, but we also know that that's something where he can contribute too. So I think that Drayton seems really, really impressed with what he's gotten out of Allen so far.
Katron Allen on the season through these three matchups, 34 carries, 273 yards, 3 touchdowns. His longest run was that 67-yard sprint to help put away FIU in game 2. And Allen has averaging 8 yards per carry on the season thus far compared to Singleton's 4.4. No red flags raised during our visit to practice. We weren't expecting important players to be missing, but you never know. Coming off the bye week, looks like a relatively healthy team. This was a topic of conversation during our Monday episode of this podcast, coming off of James Franklin's press conference, and there we saw it was validated as pretty much the entire two deep is represented. I shouldn't say pretty much, the entire two deep, as we anticipate, was out there and active in a very rainy situation on Wednesday during our look at practice. And I also afterwards, when we were able to speak to James Franklin, I asked about the right side of this offensive line, which is Anthony Donko at guard and Nolan Rucci at right tackle. And those guys went head-to-head much of 2024, battling for the starting right tackle job. It was Anthony Donko's, but they continued to get work in for Rucci over the course of the season, which paid off because Donko got hurt after 10 starts, missed the entire postseason. He ultimately missed the entire ensuing spring practices as well. And so Rucci showed a lot. He showed a lot to us. He showed a lot to the staff during postseason last year. But I'm reminded that Rucci was also sidelined for essentially all of spring practice. So these guys got back together in different situation where they're working alongside each other. Donko at guard, Rucci at right tackle. They had August to get ready. They've had a few games, and James Franklin says he feels like Anthony Donko now, it's not new to him anymore. He has a history at guard, by the way. That was his predominant position before 2024, but it's not new to him working next to Rucci. James Franklin says that they have really seen strides there. They think it's significantly going to be in a better place than it was maybe entering the season, those two working off each other, the chemistry. And he also kind of went out of his way to say they feel like Nolan Rucci going into the bye week was playing more at the level that they saw last postseason, which he said is a very, very high level. So I think that tells you that the staff felt like Nolan Rucci, to take a phrase from them, left some meat on the bone through maybe the first couple of non-conference matchups. Mark, that right side of the line has largely kind of been in focus as we've kind of evaluated things. Landon Tengwall had some great insight with us last week. He played with these guys as an offensive lineman for the Nittany Lions. You were as high as anybody on this offensive lineman, just as on this offensive line, just like we were going into the season. You took a little bit of a step back during non-conference play. You talked about that. What's your anticipation for what we witness on Saturday? Where does it need to be for this group?
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point with Rucci. I wonder if it didn't take him a while to kind of get back up to speed. It's one thing to be full go for fall camp or for preseason camp, excuse me. It's another thing to be, ready to go when you're actually in games, regardless of the opponent. So I think this is obviously going to be the measuring stick for where this offensive line is. I thought overall the left side really picked it up in the last game. And as Landon said, and he would know much better than I would because, he actually played offensive line. the right side, I think, just kind of has to come together and mesh and kind of do what it does. You have two guys who didn't really play together before, right? I mean, they were basically playing the same position. So I think it's all about developing that chemistry on that side. And this should be a game where they ought to be able to do it. I mean, you rushed for nearly 300 yards against this defense last year. I'm not predicting that exact same thing is going to happen again. But as good as Oregon is, this should be a game where you're able to establish the run. And I think it's going to be important moving forward. It's going to be a red flag if Penn State isn't able to establish the run at a competent level. What you would expect against a better Big Ten team. And I think if they are able to do that, going to look good moving forward. If they're not, it's going to be a red flag, not only for this game, but I think moving forward, because now you're starting to look, if it doesn't click in this game, are you looking at personnel changes? You say you have 7 quality players who are, quote unquote starters. If it doesn't click in this game, do you have to start looking at moving people around a little bit?
Yeah, we'll see what kind of role Cooper Cousins, TJ Shanahan have. Those are the 6th and 7th starters who haven't technically started this season. And you look at Oregon's defensive front, they got big fellas. I think that the heaviest Penn State defensive tackle at this point is maybe 315, 320. I believe they have 3 guys that go 330 plus on the Ducks defensive tackle situation, although they are young. And as we heard earlier this week from an Oregon beat reporter, there's some concern about their consistency, whether it's pad level or just play-to-play efficiency. Over on Penn State's defense, there may be a rising name to know from the freshman class. We already know there's 2 of them that are going to play extensively throughout the season. Chaz Coleman as an edge rusher, Darius Dixon as a cornerback and a special teams weapon. But Daniel's guy, Alex Tash, who you've been talking about since the spring, is standing out to you. I think he stood out to a lot of people late in the Villanova matchup. And Jim Knowles told us last week, he's a guy that they're going to get a longer look at. Maybe he can help them establish some of that linebacker depth beyond Dom DeLuca, Tony Rojas, and Amari Campbell, which they are going to need, whether it's this Saturday or down the line in Big Ten action or playoff action when they get there, if they get there. And Daniel, when you look at Alex Tash, I think the feedback from Amari Campbell stood out to me and kind of matched what we saw. He said he's freakishly athletic. Campbell described him as 6'3", 235. He's listed at 6'2", 230. So wherever he is, though, he moves fast for his size. Campbell said he's one of the fastest linebackers on this team. And what we've heard is when he is in a situation where he can read and react, meaning he is mentally up for the moment and mentally up for what's happening and developing on offense, he is really impressive at getting after the ball and tracking it. And so maybe we'll get a chance to see those instincts tested against a fast-moving Oregon offense and in the bright lights of the whiteout, because we saw him getting reps with the second-team unit yesterday as I was watching the defense. After Amari Campbell and Tony Rojas, it was Dom DeLuca and Alex Tash. So, it may be a very big Big Ten debut for Tash. I don't think he'll play 30 snaps, but if you're a 2-deep guy in this game, I think you're getting a few looks at least.
When you talk about Tash's size, he's one of those guys that he lost an inch after he signed. Penn State announced him as 6'3", on signing day in December. He's 6'2" on the roster, but he's one of those guys where it doesn't matter what he's listed at. Like, you look at him and you see that frame, like you see that he's tall, you see that there's still room to fill out, even though he's listed at 230 pounds. And, he also benefits, I think, from the eye test from his classmates. Like Cam Smith is on the smaller side, really, really quick. LeVar Arrington II has a ridiculous frame, ridiculous length, but he has to fill out a lot. And so when you put Alex Tash next to them, like, you see him as like, okay, this guy looks, pretty ready. And you stack him up against the rest of those guys in the room, and he looks like he fits in there. If you go to Lions 24/7, last week, I think last Thursday, I wrote maybe 12 or 1,300 words about Alex Tash with the feedback that we had just sort of picked up over the course of the year. Like, Tash is a guy who just kept getting brought up unprompted. By different coaches. Like Dan Connor brought him up, Jim Knowles brought him up. I think Franklin might have even brought him up once or twice, and that really catches our eye. So there's a piece, you might have to dig for it a little bit, or go to social media and maybe I'll tweet it back out. But I just kind of gathered everything that we'd heard about him, and it paints the picture of someone who no one's definitely said like, okay, like he's burning that red shirt, he's going to be out there, he's the number 4 linebacker. But it's, there's a little bit of a carrot out there that, if he does what he needs to do, if he takes the strides that he needs to, We obviously know that things can break differently ahead of him because linebacker is such a physical position, but it really does seem like that is trending in the direction that if Penn State needs to call on another linebacker, that Tash has put himself in position to be one of those guys. Like Tyler said, who knows if it'll be the whiteout? Maybe it'll be in November. Maybe it'll be in December or January when you see him, really come through in a role, just the way that these things go. But I think that number 25 on that defense is someone to keep an eye out for as we go into Big Ten play, as we see these rotations really take shape, as Penn State puts the best 11 out there, to help them win. And then, the best, 15, 16 guys that they feel like they can win with and rotate through. Seems like Tash is doing a good job of positioning himself to be one of those guys.
Villanova was his first game in a Nittany Lions uniform, so there's some flexibility there. He's got 3 more games to play before he even gets to that 4-game redshirt threshold. So I expect to see him involved in some ways against Oregon. And we know Justin Lustig, the special teams coordinator, certainly sees a compelling piece for his unit in coverage too with Tash. So could be a 2-phase kind of freshman if he can continue to make steps. We have a ton from the practice field over at Lions247.com. I took on the defensive notebook. Daniel had an offensive notebook. Mark Brennan has 4 minutes plus of video highlights. Grace Brennan has a full photo gallery from out there in the rain. So a lot over at Lions247.com, including video of James Franklin's post-practice press conference as well. Let's dive into some keys to this matchup. And Mark, it's hard to ignore what happened in Indianapolis last year. It ended up being a dramatic ending. Penn State had a shot with the ball in its hand in a 1-possession game to maybe force overtime and play for a Big Ten title there. But it was a 28-10 start. I think just about 5 minutes into the second quarter, it was 28-10. And there's a couple reasons why that can't happen. One, you don't want to be digging yourself out of a hole all night again. But 2, that would really lessen the volume of the whiteout crowd. That could really take some people out of the moment. And let's be honest, people going to this game are just as aware as Ohio State fans or Oregon fans are of Penn State's performance in some of these high-stakes matchups and whether they've come out with wins or losses under James Franklin. And you don't want that doubt starting to creep up into Beaver Stadium. I think you want to maintain that raucous energy that we know is going to be there for the opening kickoff. And what would totally kind of quell that would be if you come out, stumble out of the gates, give up some long possessions, struggle to stay on the field offensively. So to me, it's kind of twofold here. You want to do it for scoreboard purposes, but you want to maintain and preserve this precious environment that you're given on a whiteout.
A fast start, I don't think, is a priority. Avoiding a slow start, I think, is the priority. I mean, we saw last year against Ohio State, a fast start didn't really, that they end up with a pick 6 early in the game, and it was kind of all not all downhill, but I just think maintaining a level of consistency. I've talked about that all with the receivers, different areas of the team, but just being consistently good throughout the game. You're right. You can't fall into another hole, not against this team. If you look at the first Ohio State Oregon game last year, that was kind of tight all the way through. The second one, Ohio State threw haymakers early, and it was never much of a game. So if you can do that, great. But I think it's more important to not have a slow start. I know that's kind of backward engineering things, but at the very least, use the crowd, use the energy to keep you where you need to be. Again, if you jump out, great. But if this is a knockdown, drag-out fight, and I think a lot of us feel, we have our predictions coming up, a lot of us feel that's what it's going to be. I think having that, just playing consistently well throughout the night is going to be better than operating in fits and starts.
Yeah. Daniel, I think we all agree that the rush attack is going to be really paramount to what Penn State wants to accomplish against Oregon. I know Drew Allar, outside of James Franklin, has the biggest national spotlight on him for this game. He's going to wear the results, win or lose, as much as anyone outside of James Franklin. But to me, the conversation really begins with what you can accomplish on the ground. I mentioned it, almost 300 rushing yards against Oregon last December. That was an embarrassing performance for the Ducks. I think they've carried that with them defensively. They got a lot of new pieces on that side of the ball. They've got the same coordinator. Where do you stand on what Penn State needs to do from Andy Kotelnicki's perspective, especially with those 2 running backs in this offensive line?
I think when you talk about what Mark said with avoiding a slow start, I think the key there is really Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. Getting 5 yards on first down. Putting yourselves in those second and shorts, third and shorts. Fourth and even shorter if you want to push the issue early and keep things going. So I think that's where I look at with them. And then I think you're going to need both of those guys to maybe make a couple special plays here and there. We talk about Nick Singleton, and we've seen him hit these home runs over and over and over again over the course of his career. And it seemed like there were a couple opportunities early on this season for him to do that, and he just wasn't able to capitalize. I think that this is one of those games where the Oregon defense is only going to give you so many opportunities to hit those haymakers. And if you get the chance to do that, you're going to need to do that if you are Nick Singleton. Katron Allen, I think that just the consistency that he's shown this year, he broke off that 67-yarder late against FIU. So we know that he has the home runs in him. But I think that we look at these guys like a little bit of a thunder and lightning duo. And I think on Saturday night, if you want to dictate the terms of this game, use the rushing game to really own this game, you're going to need Nick Singleton to really hit a couple times.
Mark, something that keeps coming to my mind this week as I've been trying to project what we're going to witness Saturday night is when this team gets into the locker room at halftime, they have to have a very honest assessment of where they're at with the running back position. If Nick Singleton is letting it rip in those first couple quarters, great. Then you've got maybe the most dynamic running back duo that exists in college football, and you can try to ride them to the finish line. But if it's kind of more the same from Nick Singleton and you're not seeing the vision line up for him and you're maybe not seeing the confidence from him, and you're getting the same from Katron Allen where he is confident, he is rumbling for big yards, he is moving the chains for you, putting you in manageable down and distance situations. I'm not saying you got to put Nick Singleton in bubble wrap for the rest of the season, but I think for the second half on Saturday night, you got to lean on Katron Allen. And I think obviously this is a conversation that won't be had until they actually get through the first 30 minutes of football. But I think it's imperative for them to have that willingness to adjust and maybe lean into a bell cow type of situation for the third and fourth quarters if that's what it takes, because style points don't matter here. Hurt feelings don't matter here. This team needs to win this game. And in my opinion, they've got to judge where they're at with the running back spot through those first couple quarters.
Well, I think that's why we saw against Villanova, where Nick had twice as many carries as Katron, right? And I think Katron ended up with 2 more yards. But I think the coaching staff realizes what it means to have both of those guys operating at peak efficiency, and they were looking to get Nick Singleton there. That's why Nick Singleton was in there really late in the game, right? I mean, and going through your snap counts, I think there was only one other running back had a snap in that game. So they are trying to get him going. And yeah, I think the time for being able to give him extra carries to do that is over. I don't think you could double up his carries just to get him going now that you're in Big Ten play. So, yeah, I mean, let's see what happens. I will say this, and, I'm going to give away my player to watch a little bit, but I think Nick Singleton is one play away. I think if he makes that 140-yard run, it's going to do so much for his confidence. But that doesn't go to your question. I agree. I mean, we're kind of, getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but if it does continue the way, sure, I think then they would have to lean on Katron more. But I don't know that that's going to happen. I think he is one play away from things kind of, just the world being lifted off of his shoulders, taking a deep breath and being able to do what he needs to do, to let it rip. I know that we're going back and talking about that a lot, but I think Franklin mentioned that twice now. And, Drayton's using his words. I think he's this close to getting there. And I think they know that. But if he isn't, yeah, I mean, I think you got to go with, you're looking at yards per carry. Katron Allen, 8 yards per carry. Nick, 4.4 yards per carry. That's a 3-game sample.
Yeah, I'm total agreement with you, Mark, because he is one play away all the time. That's the way this kid is built. And I remember that 2022 odyssey or 2023 odyssey of a season where it was like, wow, this is quite a sophomore slump. And then they fire Yurcich, and all of a sudden he's letting it rip late. I mean, remember what he did down in Atlanta? There weren't a lot of highlights from that Peach Bowl, but one of them was like, okay, Nick Singleton's back, guys. Like, he finished his sophomore year looking like Nick Singleton again. And there were moments last year more injury related for Singleton where you wondered, okay, is he going to be that difference maker? And he certainly was, come December and January when they were in some high profile matchups. So I'm with you, but I think it's a dangerous game if you go in the second half and you haven't gotten it yet from Singleton. You're saying we got to keep feeding him because he's one play away. Franklin always says you have a finite amount of snaps to get the ball to your playmakers. And if you're power ranking where your playmakers are at halftime and Nick Singleton's not near the top of that list, got to find the ways to get the ball into the other guy's hands, starting with Katron Allen. But again, Singleton goes for 75 on the first play of this game. We can all zip it, and we can sit back, and we can watch what he does next.
Zip it and rip it.
Zip it and rip it. Daniel, of course, Drew Allar is going to get a lot of attention leading up to this one. He's gotten it from us throughout the course of his career here at Penn State. This will be his 33rd career start, I believe, as Penn State starting quarterback. And look, the lights are on. We've seen what happens sometime when it's a high-profile matchup and the numbers and the production haven't been there. Maybe it's kind of an up-and-down performance, not the consistency you're looking for from QB1. What do you make of this moment, not just for Drew Allar, but for his new set of weapons, and not just those 3 transfer receivers, but tight end Luke Reynolds as well, who's clearly an up-and-coming figure in this offense?
Definitely. I mean, I think that talking to Allar this week, he seems very aware of the type of matchup that this is going to be. He called it a heavyweight fight, and he thinks that it's going to be back and forth as this goes along. And we'll see what this looks like. I mean, I think that for being in his position and the narratives that are around him, it didn't really feel like he was a big topic of conversation over the course of this week. We talked to him on Tuesday. James Franklin got one question about him Wednesday. I talked to Venga Ioane a little bit Wednesday night about him too. But I think that the way things are is that everyone sort of knows what the deal is right now with Drew Allar, where he stands, the type of quarterback he is, and what he needs to show. And that's where those other playmakers come in. I think this is going to be the last time that a lot of people watched Penn State. No offense to Penn State, but I don't think a lot of people were tuned into that non-conference slate. Maybe they were box score watching a little bit, but the last time that the majority of the people who are going to be watching on Saturday night saw Drew Allar was in that Orange Bowl game. They saw how it ended. They know what the statistic is when it comes to the wide receivers, not catching passes. And so on Saturday night, you're going to see Kyron Hudson, Trevor Pena, Devontae Ross have the opportunity to step up and help Allar along and change the perception a little bit of Penn State, change the narrative that's out there about this being a program that has had poor wide receiver play recently, or wide receivers who don't step up for their quarterback in certain spots, things like that. So yeah, I mean, these wide receivers are going to have the spotlight on them, and how Drew Allar plays is connected to how these wide receivers play. How these wide receivers play is connected to how Drew Allar plays. And that's going to be something that I think a lot of people are watching Saturday night.
3 players over a dozen catches right now for Penn State. Luke Reynolds has 13. So does Trevor Pena. Kyron Hudson leads the way with 14. Devontae Ross beginning to come along more at wide receiver in the last couple non-conference games with 5 catches, including a long touchdown in game 2. So we'll see what happens there. I think flipping it over to the defensive perspective for Jim Knowles, he had 2 run-ins with his Oregon squad last year. One did not go well out in Eugene, and that resulted in a loss for Ohio State. The other went extremely well as they suffocated and swarmed Dylan Gabriel, the guy that we saw kind of light up Penn State at different times just a few weeks earlier. They didn't have any answers against Jim Knowles and Ohio State in that playoff matchup out in the Rose Bowl. And so, Mark, as we shift towards what this looks like for Jim Knowles, now wearing a Penn State logo on his chest, and again, coaching against a team that has a new quarterback, but the same staff in place. Will Stein, highly respected offensive mind. What do you make of Jim Knowles' opportunity to introduce himself at a very large level to Penn State fans here? And what do you think are the most important elements of what they need to do on that side of the ball?
I think being in attack mode is key. If you look at the 2 games last year that he had against Oregon, the first game, I think it was either no sacks or maybe 1 sack. The second game, as you noted, 8 sacks. And we saw Dylan Gabriel. I mean, he was good at getting rid of the ball quickly. Penn State only had 1 sack against him in the Big Ten championship game. So I think one of the keys is attacking this quarterback. I don't think he's going to be as savvy more as Dylan Gabriel was, because I thought Dylan Gabriel was fantastic against Penn State. Not that Dante Moore isn't a good quarterback, but I think, and I know it's on the rundown here, I think getting him out of his comfort zone is going to be the key. Maybe make him look as comfortable as he was when he was in that golf cart with Yurcich all those years ago. Sorry.
Well done. Well done.
I had to go back to that. That was too much. I did actually see that photo again. But no, that's one of the ways you may give up a play or two, which I think is fine. I think that's better than the methodical thump, 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 thump that Oregon was doing against Penn State early in that Big Ten title game, where Penn State was just, on its heels, couldn't stop it on any of those early drives. So I think getting after the quarterback, being aggressive, taking the fight to Oregon is going to be the key. And I think if you look at both of those Ohio State games last year, you could see the distinct difference in his approach. And now Dan Lanning knows this, right? And their offensive staff gets this. So I'm sure they're adjusting too. But I think it would be a mistake to do what Tom Allen did early in that game and kind of play back and on your heels and not try to mitigate Oregon's speed by being aggressive and utilizing your speed.
Yeah, and I mean, what we can note about Dante Moore, although this is his first time as a starter, he's in that offensive meeting room. He's in that quarterback room last year as they're preparing for Jim Knowles a couple different times. And he transferred over from UCLA after being a big 5-star pickup for the Bruins, waited his turn behind Gabriel. He's come out the other side of it looking pretty good through 4 starts, 75% completion rating, 11 touchdown passes, 1 interception. He could be great. He could come out the other end of his college career.
1 sack.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. And he could come out the other end of his college career and be a high-level NFL draft prospect, but we're really early in the process, and this will be a major litmus test for his young career and in a whiteout setting. And, oh, by the way, he's trying to manage this high up-tempo attack while dealing with the sound, while dealing with Penn State's defense and Jim Knowles. And I will tell you, I don't think I've ever seen the scout team run as quick-paced as we saw yesterday. And credit to Jackson Smolik, and who was doing the quarterback job and playing the role of Moore, and credit to the coaches who get that scout team ready to prepare the defense, because it was snap. And it was like very little time to adjust. And that's a lot different on your own practice field versus doing it in front of 110,000 screaming people who are trying to get on Oregon's offense, but also maybe impacting your ability to communicate as a defense. But we have a lot to learn about Moore. Thus far, he's looked strong. I think in terms of making him uncomfortable, Daniel, it's kind of twofold. And Denai Dennis Sutton told us this early in the week. It's a collaborative effort between the back end of the defense and the front end. Denai said he feels like under Jim Knowles, they have a lot more freedom to go get after the quarterback up front. He says there's a lot more autonomy, it sounds like, for edge rushers, for pass rushers in this defense. We know Denai is established. I think Zariah Fisher showed you enough during non-conference, getting his feet back under him, that you feel pretty good about him opposite of Denai. But let's be honest, we all want to see what Chaz Coleman looks like in the bright lights of Beaver Stadium. And we also want to see what A.J. Harris looks like when the opposing quarterback actually throws the football in his direction, which we haven't seen this season so far. I spoke with A.J. a little bit after practice on Wednesday, and I said, how do you kind of balance that fact that, you want to make plays, but you're also getting respected and not getting targeted? He said, there will come a week, and he said, it might be this week, it might not be, where they're going to test me. They're going to see if I'm sleeping because I haven't been targeted. And he followed that up by saying, I am always up. And so I'm curious. And one more line from A.J. Harris that I really appreciated. He's a guy who's pretty succinct in his responses, but he packs a lot of context into him, and I appreciate that. I asked about what Jim Knowles has kind of brought from Ohio State for this matchup in particular, and he said, everything we need. And he left it at that. Daniel, what's the best game plan? What's the most effective way to rattle this young quarterback and ensure that his momentum comes to a screeching halt in Beaver Stadium on Saturday night?
Yeah, with AJ Harris, Pro Football Focus has credited him with being targeted once. I brought that stat up, I think, earlier this week. One of our great posters on Lions 24/7 went back to the Nevada game, found the play, and it was apparently a bubble screen where Harris was like 8 yards away from the play, and there were a bunch of blockers. So, I feel like at this point it should be implied, but every once in a while we gotta bring out the PFF disclaimer every time we bring it out. But I think that you look at what Oregon has at wide receiver. I think we are going to see AJ Harris tested. We're going to see if he is that first round talent. We're going to see what Penn State has in Aldavian Collins and Elliott Washington opposite him. But I think when it comes to Dante Moore, I made sure to get that picture of him and Yurcich on the golf cart on the message board this week. That I think that he has a little bit more of an upside than what you had with Gabriel last year. But the trade-off there, like physically, And then the trade-off there is that Gabriel was like, what, fifth or sixth year guy, was at his third school, had the savvy, had seen pretty much everything. And I thought for most of last year, up until that Rose Bowl, was pretty unflappable. So I think that there is room to get after more a little bit, maybe throw things at him that he hasn't necessarily seen, or things that maybe he's seen on film because he's been around, he's started, he's played, he's prepared to be a starter, but hasn't seen it in person, hasn't seen it on the field in that whiteout environment. I think that there is an avenue there. These pass rushers are going to be really important in doing that, but it's not going to be easy. Like Isaiah World, the Oregon left tackle, he's a projected first-round pick. He transferred in from Nevada during the offseason. I know that Oregon is known for the flashy uniforms and everything like that, but ever since Willie Taggart and Mario Cristobal were there, they've really made their living in the trenches, and they've really turned out some high quality offensive linemen and have been sort of a smash mouth team at times these past couple of years. So I think that you're going to need Denai Dennis-Sutton and Zane Durant to play up to their capabilities. And you're going to need a guy like Chaz Coleman, who is finally going to be seeing, or we're finally going to see him go against some, real high level talent. Like he's going to have to be on, he's going to have to maybe avoid some things that maybe you could make a mistake, get away with it against Villanova, FIU, Nevada, won't necessarily get away with it against Oregon. I think that there's just a lot of moving parts here when it comes to getting after more and making him uncomfortable, but Penn State has the pieces to make that happen.
I'll mention a couple more of those pieces. Tony Rojas, Amari Campbell. Rojas coming off a 2-sack performance. Those guys combined for 5 tackles for loss and 3 sacks against Villanova. Major leap in competition, but Amari Campbell is an established pass rusher at the linebacker position. He has now 7.5 sacks since the start of last season. I think we've seen that as an evolving part of Rojas's game. He is such a speed threat at that level. And those guys playing off each other with a lot of confidence. They have a background together. I really like what they're bringing in. I think there's a chance that they can be disruptive presences too. And you mentioned the offensive line. World is a big-time transfer pickup. He was one of 3 transfer additions that are going to start for this team on the offensive line. They had to replace 4 total starters from the team that won the Big Ten title last year. And I wonder a little bit if Penn State meets them in the right moment where they haven't had enough maybe lead up to mesh quite yet. They haven't played 4-quarter matchups through the 4-0 start. They've had, a bunch of reserves come in late. So I wonder a little bit if this is not the most ideal time for Oregon to have to trot out these 5 guys, have them be a cohesive unit against this particular defense in front of this particular crowd, maybe an exploitable part of this matchup for Penn State. Let's get into our players to watch. We each will pick one, and Mark, we'll begin with you.
Yeah, I'm reversing field. I'm going to go with Denai Dennis-Sutton. Nobody gets the crowd going more than he does, and I think he absorbs the energy of the crowd as much as anybody on this team. So I think, obviously, this isn't like an unknown commodity, but I think he's the sort of player in this game could really step up. A lot of people are saying how good he was last year with Abdul Carter on the side. On the other side, I think this is the game where he steps up on a national stage and establishes himself as a big-time playmaker. And again, you have a whiteout crowd. The last few years, I don't know of anybody on this team who has gotten the crowd more fired up and who has drawn more energy from the crowd. So I think it's a big game for Denai.
Denai is as fun as any player I've ever watched in between the whistles. In between the plays, I should say, because, there's a lot to his body language. There's a lot to his emotion out there, and something to keep tabs on if you're watching on TV or you're in the stands. Keep an eye on Big 33 in between some of these plays as he maybe tries to get in the head of Dante Moore and some of those Oregon players. Who are you going with here, Daniel?
Tyler, you teed me up to talk about him a little bit earlier, and I slow played it a little bit, but I'm going to go with Luke Reynolds. I think that we've already talked about Drew Allar. We've already talked about Nick Singleton. Mark just brought up Denai Dennis-Sutton. Those are your former 5-stars that are playing in this game. Luke Reynolds is another one. You talk about it, like you need your 5-stars to play like 5-stars in games like this. These are the types of players that can make a difference, given what they can do physically, what their capabilities are. And I think we've seen Reynolds develop into that type of player who can maybe make something happen. He can do things with the ball in his hands after the catch. He can make tough catches. We've heard really good things about how physical he can be as a blocker. I think that this could be a potential breakout spot for him, especially when all the talk is about, well, you lost Tyler Warren from last year. There's no more Tyler Warren in that tight end room. What else is there? I think Luke Reynolds can have the opportunity to step into that spotlight and get a lot of attention Saturday night.
I was going to go Luke Reynolds too. I'm reminded that Tyler Warren told us at his pro day, Luke Reynolds has a chance to be the best to ever play tight end at Penn State. And that was coming from the best to ever play tight end at Penn State. So I paid attention to it. And I'll tell you what, something that people keep bringing up, whether it's James Franklin, whether it's Drew Allar, the things he can do after the catch are not normal for a tight end. And you're right. I mean, the 5-star pedigree is already on display early in his sophomore year. 11 catches in the last couple of games combined, becoming quickly a favorite target for Drew Allar. I'm going to go with Zachy Wheatley because I think the way that Oregon can develop some of those explosive plays, they can get on you in a hurry with some of the quick release throws. He's going to be important to be that last line of defense. I think even in non-conference play, you probably give up more like 24, 31 points instead of 17 points if Zachy Wheatley doesn't snuff out some of those long distance gains. He's been outstanding as an open field tackler, taking the right angles. And we heard from him this week on a Zoom call, very confident in the way he's playing right now. I think he's in complete control of his situation. And kind of like you referenced, Mark, with Denai Dennis Sutton, to me, this is a moment where if he goes out and delivers, a lot more people are going to be familiar with his game, who he is. He's a fifth-year senior. I think he's earned this opportunity, and he's going to be crucial if Penn State wants to turn, some of those potential 50-yard gains into 25-yard gains, which can really add up, maybe force field goals instead of touchdowns. And so I think Zachy Wheatley is where I look at after Daniel takes Luke Reynolds out of my hands there. It's time for our score predictions. Ready or not, Daniel, get us started.
Yeah, well, I was going to go with Zachy Wheatley if I didn't go with Luke Reynolds there, Tyler. So
Nice trade.
I'm glad we're all on the same wavelength here. I think we're going to see a real back and forth game. I think it's going to be really physical. I think it's going to be one of those games where it feels like it's low scoring just because it's going to take so much effort to get the yards, to get the points. But I think there's enough talent on the offensive side of the ball that you'll see a score in the 30s by the time this game is over. So even though I've got Portland, Oregon, the Rose City up above my right shoulder right here in my background, I'm going with Penn State, 31-28. I think that they're going to make enough plays, be in the right position at the end, take advantage of this environment and really ride it to victory. I think my bold prediction, we're going to get a big Kaytron Allen game. I don't necessarily know if it'll be kind of what Tyler said, where at halftime you reevaluate things and say, all right, like we're riding Kaytron Allen the rest of the way. Or if it's just from the jump, he's ready to go. He's taking over a game. I think he's going to have 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. He had 8.9 yards per carry against the Ducks in that Big Ten championship game. I think the game flow is going to be a little bit different this year because I think Penn State will hang early. But I think that Allen will be able to be the bell cow, be the workhorse to help carry Penn State to a victory here Saturday night.
I believe 150 plus will be Kaytron Allen's most productive single game. I think 144 is his highest rushing total thus far. So that would be a hell of a performance for him. Mark, do you also have Penn State and James Franklin picking up a huge win on Saturday night?
I do. I'm going 27-21. One thing that I don't think we talked about, and I do want to hit on it, is special teams play. Ryan Barker has been so good for Penn State, absolutely clutch. I mean, he is making kicks. The only one that he missed was beyond 50, and it was a botched assignment by one of the linemen. And I think in this sort of environment, I don't think he's going to be fazed by the noise and whatnot. I think he's going to be fine, and I think he'll prove to be the difference. One thing I'm saying about this game, and I hope it doesn't come across the wrong way, I don't think they need Drew Allar to win this game. I think they need him not to lose it. They need him not to make the key mistake late as he did in several of their games that they lost last year. He had 8 interceptions last year. 4 of them were in their 3 losses. 1 at the end of the Oregon game, 1 very late against Notre Dame that allowed Notre Dame to basically run out the clock and kick a field goal. So he just has to make smart decisions, make the throws everybody knows he can make. That doesn't mean he can't take deep shots, but getting it done kind of in the clutch, not feeling you have to carry the entire team on on your shoulders. That's going to be key for him. But I think Penn State is going to win this by 6. My bold prediction, I hit on it a little earlier. I think Knowles is going to dial up a lot of different things. After only 1 sack against Oregon in the Big Ten title game, I think they have 5 in this game, at least 5. And I think at least 1 from all 3 levels, line, linebacker, and defensive back, because I think he's going to be bringing people from all different angles.
Yeah, I feel pretty comfortable in hanging my hat on Jim Knowles and this Penn State defense, not to necessarily shut down Oregon, but to hold them under 30, like you guys said. And in my opinion, if you hold your opponent under 30 at home in the whiteout with what you retained on offense, what you added through the transfer portal, the 5-star tight end you got on the up, and the offensive coordinator that everyone's so high on, you got to win the game. You have to win the game if you hold Oregon under 30. And ultimately, I believe that they will do enough, led by the ground game, to get there. I think the key here is, can you establish that rhythm offensively led by the ground game where all of a sudden you've got confidence-inducing throws stringing together for Drew Allar. He's starting to get on a roll, and it doesn't need to be a 40-yard bomb to Devontae Ross, but it needs to be consistent, move the chains. Third down is going to be huge here for Drew Allar because that has not been sharp through non-conference play. That has to change because when you convert third downs, you keep Oregon's offense off the field, you give your defense a breather, and you put yourself in a better shot to get the balls to your playmakers and ultimately get points on the board. And so I landed at 27-24, Penn State winning. And for my bold prediction, I went your route, Mark. You mentioned special teams play. I think it's definitely a stock-up unit overall. Maybe we see Gabe Nwosu make an impact in this game as a punter. Maybe Devontae Ross as a punt returner again. But really, for me, I think Ryan Barker is going to get the job done when he needs to, including a go-ahead field goal in the final 2 minutes of this game to push Penn State ahead 27-24. We saw him do it on the road against USC. I believe that was his first or second career start last fall. He's much more settled in at this point. I think he's proven a lot. And so I think if they do get him in position where he's got to make a kick like that, it would take some work by Drew Allar in the offense to get there and that kind of 2-minute situation, and they'd have to go do it. But I think Ryan Barker can deliver if they get him within range. And something else to keep in mind, Justin Lustig said, there's a potential for 60-plus yards from Gabe Nwosu. So if they weren't able to make it like a 50-yard range field goal at the end of this game, maybe Nwosu comes out and hits a bomb toward the end of this one. But my prediction is Barker becomes the hero and Penn State walks off a winner. We all have Penn State reaching 4-0. Not all of us have them covering the 3.5-point spread. Mark, you do. We'll see what happens there. Daniel and I have them winning by a field goal. And that's going to do it for this preview episode of the Lions 24/7 podcast. I encourage you to check out our coverage between now and kickoff. It's a night game, so there's a little more opportunity for you to hopefully check out all of our content on the site. We will be in the stadium very early ahead of team arrival. Check out all of our notes. We'll have a running thread going about what we're observing before and during warm-ups. And as the crowd forms, we'll share some photos and videos of all that stuff. It's going to be an electric atmosphere. For those of you in the building, congratulations, you got a ticket. For those of you who are not in the building, please follow our coverage at lions247.com before and after. We'll come to you with a late night, early morning post-game podcast for however this one turns out with Daniel and I. For now, though, on behalf of Mark and Daniel, I'm Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.